The restaurant was known for its quiet luxury. Soft music floated through the air, and the lights were low but warm. Crystal glasses lined the tables, and every plate looked like a piece of art. This was the kind of place where powerful people came to be seen, not to be disturbed. That evening, a group of wealthy guests filled the center of the room, laughing loudly and speaking with confidence, as if the world always listened to them. Among them sat a billionaire who was used to getting his way. His voice carried across the table as he spoke about business deals, court cases, and how money could solve almost anything. People leaned in when he talked. They nodded even when they did not fully understand. He enjoyed that feeling, the feeling of being important. Moving quietly between the tables was a young waitress. She wore a simple uniform and kept her head slightly lowered as she worked. She had learned that in places like this, servers were expected to be invisible. Her job was to refill glasses, place plates gently on the table, and walk away before anyone noticed her presence. Still, she listened, not out of curiosity but out of habit. Her mind had been trained to notice details, words, and meanings. As she poured water near the billionaire's table, she heard him mention a legal dispute. He spoke with confidence, explaining how the law was on his side. One small detail in his explanation was wrong. It was not a big mistake, but it was important. The waitress hesitated. She told herself to stay silent. Speaking up could cost her the job she needed so badly. But something inside her pushed her forward. When the billionaire paused, she spoke softly, careful not to interrupt. She politely mentioned that the rule he was talking about had been updated and no longer applied in that way. Her voice was calm and respectful. She did not mean to embarrass him. She only meant to help. The table went quiet. The billionaire slowly turned to look at her. At first he seemed confused. Then a smile spread across his face. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who believed they were being challenged by someone far beneath them. A few people at the table exchanged looks, already sensing what was coming. He asked her where she had learned such things. His tone was playful but sharp underneath. The waitress answered honestly. She said she had studied law. She did not raise her voice or try to prove anything. She simply stated a fact. That was when the billionaire laughed. It was a loud laugh, full and confident, meant for everyone to hear. Others at the table joined in, some out of surprise, others because they did not want to be the only ones not laughing. A few nearby guests turned their heads to see what was so funny. "A lawyer?" the billionaire repeated, still smiling. He looked her up and down, taking in her uniform, her tired eyes, and her modest posture. "And you're serving tables here?" The waitress nodded. She did not explain further. She had learned long ago that explaining her life to strangers rarely changed their minds. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the moment. He made a joke about how everyone was a lawyer these days. Someone added a comment about social media experts and online degrees. The laughter grew louder. The waitress felt the heat rise to her face, but she stayed calm. Her hands were steady as she finished her task. She reminded herself why she was there. She needed the money. She needed stability. She needed to keep going. What no one at that table knew was how far she had come to stand there holding a tray. Years earlier, she had sat in crowded classrooms, surrounded by heavy books and long lectures. She had studied late into the night, reading case after case while others slept. She had passed exams that broke many students. She had believed that hard work would be enough. Then life had changed. A sudden family crisis had turned everything upside down. Medical bills piled up. Savings disappeared. Promises of support fell apart. Opportunities closed one by one. She had to choose between survival and pride. She chose survival. Working as a waitress was never part of her dream, but it kept food on the table and a roof over her family's heads. Every shift paid for another step forward, even if that step was small. She told herself it was temporary, even on days when it felt endless. Back in the restaurant, the billionaire finally waved his hand, signaling that the moment was over. The waitress was dismissed as easily as she had been called over. She stepped away, her heart heavy but her head held high. From a distance, she continued her work. She served other guests, cleaned tables, and smiled when required. The room slowly returned to its normal buzz, but something had changed. A few people who had overheard the exchange looked at her differently now. Some with curiosity, some with quiet respect, others with doubt. The billionaire, however, did not think of her again. To him, it was just a small joke, a moment of amusement in an otherwise important evening. He returned to his conversation, confident as ever, unaware that his laughter would soon come back to him in a way he never expected. As the night went on, the waitress took a short break near the back of the restaurant. She leaned against the wall, closed her eyes for a moment, and took a deep breath. She reminded herself that her story was not finished. One moment of laughter could not erase years of effort. She did not know it yet, but the paths of her life and the billionaire's life were moving toward a place neither of them could avoid. And when that moment came, the room would be far quieter than it had been that night. For now, she returned to the floor, picked up her tray, and kept walking forward, one steady step at a time. The next morning began before sunrise. The waitress woke up to the sound of her alarm in a small, quiet apartment. The room was plain but clean. A thin curtain moved slightly as air slipped in through a cracked window. She sat up slowly, letting the tiredness settle before pushing herself out of bed. Another long day waited for her, and she had learned not to waste energy complaining about it. She moved carefully so she wouldn't wake anyone else. In the kitchen, she boiled water and prepared a simple breakfast. While eating, she opened a worn notebook filled with handwritten notes. The pages were marked with underlines, small reminders, and case references. This notebook had followed her everywhere for years. It was proof of a life she had not given up on. She reviewed a few pages before closing it again. Time was short. Bills were stacked neatly on the table, each one a quiet reminder of why she worked so hard. She folded the notebook and placed it back in her bag, just as she did every day. On her way to the restaurant, the memory of the previous night returned. The laughter, the looks, the way the billionaire had smiled as if he had won something. She did not feel anger as much as disappointment. Not because of him, but because moments like that showed how easily people judged without knowing anything at all. At work, things felt mostly the same. Plates clinked. Orders were called out. The smell of food filled the air. But a few co-workers treated her differently now. One quietly asked if what she said last night was true. Another joked about needing legal advice someday. She smiled politely and changed the subject. She did not want attention. Attention often came with questions she was tired of answering. During her break, she stepped outside and checked her phone. There was a message she had been waiting for, sent late the night before. It was short but important. A legal organization she had volunteered with in the past was asking for help. A complex case had come up suddenly, and they needed someone to assist with research and preparation. It was unpaid, but it could lead to something more. She read the message twice, then once more. Her heart beat a little faster. This was the kind of opportunity that rarely came her way anymore. She typed a careful reply, agreeing to help. As she pressed send, she felt a familiar mix of hope and fear. That evening, after her shift ended, she did not go straight home. Instead, she stopped by a small library not far from the restaurant. It was quiet, nearly empty, and smelled faintly of old books. She found a corner desk and spread out her notes. Hours passed as she read, compared information, and wrote down ideas. This was the work she loved. This was where she felt most like herself. As she worked, the story of her past came back to her more clearly. She remembered the day she had been accepted into law school. She remembered how proud her family had been, how full of belief they were. She remembered thinking that once she crossed that finish line, life would finally be stable. But stability had slipped away faster than she could hold on to it. After graduation, she faced closed doors everywhere. Firms wanted experience she didn't have. Internships didn't pay enough to cover basic living costs. When her family needed help, she stepped in without hesitation. One sacrifice led to another, until her own dreams were pushed further and further aside. Still, she never stopped learning. Back at the restaurant days later, news began to spread quietly. The billionaire from the charity dinner was facing legal trouble. A major deal had gone wrong, and several parties were involved. The case was gaining attention, and people whispered about it between shifts. She listened but said nothing. She had learned to keep her thoughts to herself. That same week, the legal organization asked her to come in person. The office was small and modest, nothing like the polished firms she once dreamed of working for. But the people there spoke with respect and purpose. They treated her as an equal, not as someone pretending to belong. She spent hours reviewing documents and pointing out issues others had missed. Her calm focus impressed them. By the end of the day, one of the senior lawyers told her she had a sharp mind and asked if she would be willing to appear as part of the legal team under special appointment. For a moment, she couldn't speak. This was not a full-time position. It did not come with money or promises. But it was real. It was a step back into the world she thought she had lost. She agreed without hesitation, even knowing it would mean longer nights and more pressure. When she returned home, she sat quietly, letting the reality sink in. She thought about the restaurant, about the laughter, about how small she had felt standing there with a tray in her hands. And she thought about how easily people assumed that was all she would ever be. The days that followed were exhausting. She balanced shifts at the restaurant with long hours of legal work. Sleep became short. Meals were rushed. Some nights she questioned whether she could keep going like this. But every time she felt doubt creeping in, she reminded herself why she started. Meanwhile, the billionaire prepared for court with full confidence. He hired expensive lawyers and trusted his reputation to carry him through. The case, to him, was just another problem to be handled. He never imagined that a familiar face from a restaurant would soon appear in his world again. One evening, as the waitress reviewed documents late into the night, she paused and looked out the window. The city lights glowed softly in the distance. She thought about how close she was to walking away from all of this, how easily she could have accepted that her life would never change. Instead, she picked up her pen and kept working. She did not know exactly what the future held. She did not know how the case would end. But she knew one thing for certain. When the moment came to stand in the place she had earned, she would be ready. And far away, without realizing it, the billionaire was moving closer to the same courtroom, where laughter would have no place at all. The morning of the court hearing arrived quietly. The city moved as it always did, full of noise and rush, unaware that small moments inside a courtroom could change lives. The waitress woke up before dawn, her body tired but her mind alert. She sat on the edge of her bed for a few seconds, breathing slowly, reminding herself to stay calm. She dressed carefully, choosing simple, neat clothes. Nothing expensive, nothing flashy. Just clean lines and confidence. As she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the person staring back. She still saw the waitress who carried trays late into the night, but she also saw the lawyer she had worked so hard to become. On the way to the courthouse, she reviewed her notes again and again. Every argument, every detail. She knew this case mattered, not just for the people involved, but for her own future. This was her chance to prove she belonged. Inside the courthouse, the air felt different from the restaurant. It was quieter, heavier. People spoke in low voices. Shoes echoed against the floor. She checked in and took a seat with the legal team she was assisting. They greeted her warmly, treating her with respect. That alone gave her strength. Then the doors opened again, and the billionaire walked in. He arrived surrounded by lawyers and assistants, moving with confidence, as if the building had been made for him. His posture was relaxed. His face showed no worry. To him, this was just another legal matter that money and influence would smooth over. As he took his seat, his eyes moved around the room, scanning faces without really seeing them. Then, for a brief moment, his gaze paused. He saw her. At first, he wasn't sure why she looked familiar. She was seated quietly, focused on her papers. She was not wearing a uniform. There was no tray in her hands. Slowly, recognition dawned. His lips curved into a faint smile, amused by the coincidence. He leaned toward one of his lawyers and whispered something, clearly not taking the situation seriously. The lawyer nodded, equally confident. The waitress felt his eyes on her but did not look up. She had learned that confidence did not come from meeting someone's stare, but from knowing exactly why you were standing where you stood. When the judge entered, everyone rose. The room settled into silence. The case began with formal introductions. Names were read out, roles explained. When it came time for her introduction, she stood. Her voice was steady as she spoke. She stated her role clearly and respectfully. There was no hesitation. The billionaire's smile faded slightly. He leaned back in his chair, studying her now, not with amusement, but with curiosity. Still, he did not feel threatened. Not yet. The hearing moved forward. Arguments were presented. Documents were discussed. At first, she listened, taking notes, observing carefully. Then the moment came when her team needed her input. She stood again and began to speak. Her words were simple but precise. She pointed out details buried deep within the documents, connections that had been overlooked. She explained how certain actions contradicted existing rules. She did not raise her voice or try to impress. She simply told the truth as the facts showed it. The courtroom listened. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, paying close attention. Across the room, the billionaire's lawyers exchanged looks. One of them quickly whispered to him. His confident posture shifted. He straightened in his seat, his eyes fixed on her now. She continued, answering questions calmly when asked. Each response was clear. Each point landed exactly where it needed to. There was no drama, no emotion, just sharp focus. For the first time, the billionaire felt something unfamiliar. Doubt. He remembered the restaurant, the laughter, the way he had dismissed her words without a second thought. A small, uncomfortable feeling settled in his chest. The judge called for a short pause. People stood, whispered, and moved around. The billionaire remained seated, deep in thought. He glanced at her again, this time without a smile. During the break, she remained at her seat, reviewing her notes. One of the senior lawyers leaned over and quietly praised her work. She nodded, grateful but focused. When the session resumed, the judge asked specific questions, questions that clearly came from what she had presented earlier. She answered without hesitation, her confidence growing with each response. The billionaire's legal team struggled to adjust. Their earlier confidence began to crack. The room could feel the shift, even if no one said it out loud. As the day went on, the judge announced that the hearing would continue another day. Final decisions would come later. The room slowly emptied. As she gathered her things, the billionaire stood nearby, watching her from a distance. He looked unsettled. He wanted to say something, but pride held him back. She walked past him without a word. Outside, the sun was brighter than she expected. She paused on the courthouse steps, taking a deep breath. Her hands were slightly shaking now that the tension had eased. She had done well. She knew it. That evening, she returned to the restaurant for her shift. The contrast felt strange. One moment she had been standing before a judge, the next she was tying her apron again. But this time, something inside her had changed. As she moved between tables, she carried herself differently. Not louder, not bolder, just steadier. Across the city, the billionaire sat alone in his office, replaying the day in his mind. The image of the waitress standing confidently in court refused to leave him. For the first time in a long while, he questioned his own judgment. And for the first time, he realized that the story he thought was simple was far from over. The next court day arrived with a heavier feeling in the air. Word had spread quietly about the previous session. People knew this case was no longer simple. The waitress arrived early again, carrying the same worn bag, but her steps felt firmer this time. She had spent most of the night preparing, reviewing every possible question that could come her way. Inside the courtroom, the seats filled faster than before. Observers, assistants, and legal staff whispered among themselves. The billionaire entered later than usual, his face serious now, his movements more careful. The easy confidence he once carried was missing. When everyone stood for the judge, the room fell completely silent. The judge took a moment longer than usual before sitting down, scanning the courtroom slowly. It felt as if something important was about to happen. The hearing resumed, and the discussion went straight to the heart of the dispute. The judge asked pointed questions, no longer allowing vague answers. One by one, the billionaire's lawyers responded, but their words lacked the strength they once had. Then the judge turned toward the waitress. She stood calmly. Her heart was beating fast, but her voice remained steady. The judge asked her to explain a key point that had caused confusion the previous day. She took a breath and spoke clearly, breaking the issue down into simple language that everyone could understand. As she spoke, the judge listened closely. Halfway through her explanation, the judge did something unexpected. He stood up from his chair. The movement was slow but deliberate. The courtroom froze. No one spoke. Even the sound of breathing felt loud. The judge looked around the room, then addressed everyone directly. He spoke about the importance of facts over assumptions, of preparation over appearances. He praised the clarity and depth of the analysis that had been presented. Then he turned back to the waitress. He acknowledged her work openly, stating that her contribution had brought essential clarity to the case. He mentioned her academic background and her ability to explain complex matters with honesty and skill. The room remained silent, but the impact was loud. The billionaire sat motionless. His face tightened as realization settled in. This was no coincidence. This was no lucky moment. The waitress he had laughed at knew exactly what she was doing. From that point on, the balance of the courtroom shifted. The judge allowed her to continue. She walked through documents, timelines, and decisions that directly challenged the billionaire's position. Each point was supported by facts. Each response to questioning was calm and respectful. The billionaire's lawyers tried to interrupt, to redirect, but the judge stopped them more than once, insisting that she finish her explanation. People in the room exchanged looks. Some nodded quietly. Others wrote notes quickly. The atmosphere had changed from casual observation to intense focus. The billionaire felt something heavier than doubt now. He felt exposed. For years, he had trusted that power protected him, that money softened consequences, that people without status had little influence. Watching the judge stand in respect for someone he had dismissed shattered that belief. During a short recess, the billionaire spoke urgently with his legal team. Their voices were low, tense. The confidence of earlier meetings was gone. They realized the case was no longer safely in their control. Across the room, the waitress sat quietly, drinking water, reviewing her notes. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. She treated the moment as what it was, part of the process. When the session resumed, the judge addressed the billionaire directly for the first time. His questions were firm but fair. Each answer was examined carefully. The judge no longer accepted general statements or excuses. The waitress was asked again to clarify several points. Each time, she answered without hesitation. By the end of the day, it was clear that the case would not end quickly. The judge announced that the court would continue after further review. His final words made it clear that assumptions and status would play no role in the decision. As people began to leave, the billionaire remained seated for a long moment. He watched as the waitress packed her papers. She moved with quiet confidence, the same calm presence she had shown since the start. He stood and approached her, stopping a short distance away. For a moment, neither spoke. He finally admitted that he had underestimated her. The words came out stiffly, unused to leaving his mouth. He did not apologize yet, but the pride in his voice was gone. She listened politely and replied simply. She said that she understood how easy it was to judge people by where they stood, not by what they carried inside. Her tone was not angry. It was honest. She walked past him and left the courtroom. Outside, she paused again on the steps. This time, she allowed herself a small smile. Not because she had embarrassed anyone, but because she had stayed true to herself. That evening, back at the restaurant, a few coworkers noticed the change in her. She seemed lighter, more grounded. She worked her shift as usual, but the weight she once carried felt less heavy. Across the city, the billionaire sat alone again, staring out at the lights. The laughter from the restaurant felt like it belonged to another lifetime. For the first time, he understood that respect was not something he could buy. And for the waitress, the path ahead was finally opening, one earned step at a time. The final court day arrived without drama, but everyone who entered the room felt its weight. There were no whispers this time, no casual smiles. People took their seats quietly, knowing that the outcome would affect more than just a business dispute. The waitress arrived early once again, carrying herself with the same calm she had learned to trust. The billionaire arrived shortly after. He looked different now, not weaker but more aware. The sharp confidence that once filled every step had softened into something closer to caution. He no longer looked at the room as if it belonged to him. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The silence was deep and respectful. The judge began by summarizing the case, carefully revisiting key moments from earlier sessions. Each point brought the room back through the arguments, the facts, and the turning moments that had shifted the case. When the judge spoke about the legal analysis that clarified the dispute, his eyes briefly moved toward the waitress. He did not need to say her name or role again. Everyone already knew. The final questions were asked. They were direct and clear. The billionaire's legal team answered as best they could, but the confidence they once had was gone. The facts no longer bent in their favor. The waitress was asked one last time to explain a critical detail. She stood, took a breath, and spoke plainly. No strong words, no dramatic pauses, just truth explained in a way that made sense. When she finished, the judge nodded and asked her to sit. The room waited. After a long pause, the judge delivered the decision. It was fair, balanced, and firm. The ruling acknowledged mistakes, corrected unfair advantages, and made it clear that responsibility could not be avoided. The outcome did not destroy the billionaire's life, but it changed it. The days of easy wins were over. The sound of the gavel echoed softly, signaling the end. Some people reacted with quiet relief, others with disappointment. The billionaire remained still, absorbing the reality of what had happened. For the first time, he did not argue. He did not protest. He simply accepted it. As people stood to leave, the waitress gathered her papers slowly. She felt tired, but it was a good kind of tired. The kind that comes from knowing you gave everything you had. Outside the courtroom, the billionaire approached her again. This time, there was no hesitation. He thanked her for her honesty and admitted that his laughter that night in the restaurant had been wrong. The words were simple, but they were real. She listened quietly and accepted his apology. She did not remind him of the past or try to teach him a lesson. She believed life had already done that. They parted ways without drama. In the days that followed, her life began to change slowly. The legal organization offered her a more permanent role. It was not a glamorous position, but it was meaningful. Paid modestly but fairly. Most importantly, it allowed her to practice the law she had worked so hard to learn. She still worked some shifts at the restaurant for a while. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to leave on her own terms. This time, when she walked through the dining room, she felt no shame. Every step had led her where she was now. Some guests recognized her. A few even treated her differently. She did not let it change her. She remained the same person she had always been. One evening, as she finished her final shift, she removed her apron and folded it carefully. She thanked her coworkers, many of whom had supported her quietly over the years. Then she walked out of the restaurant for the last time, feeling the air on her face. Across the city, the billionaire adjusted to his new reality. He became more careful with his decisions, more attentive to the people around him. The memory of the waitress standing in court stayed with him. It reminded him that intelligence and strength did not always announce themselves. For the waitress, the future no longer felt distant or impossible. It felt earned. She continued her work with focus and humility, never forgetting where she started or how easily people had judged her. Her story spread quietly, not as gossip, but as inspiration to those who felt unseen. She did not need applause. She did not need revenge. All she needed was the chance to stand where she belonged. And when that chance finally came, She proved that respect is not given by wealth or status, but by character, patience, and truth.